You have never once, not for a single solitary second of your entire life so far, experienced the world through anyone else's eyes. Every single conversation you have ever had in your whole life, you were the one speaking up. Every single room you have ever walked into, you were the one walking in. Your brain has spent every single waking moment of your entire existence positioned firmly at the exact center of your own personal universe. And everyone else, no matter how genuinely important they may seem to be, has technically only ever appeared as a supporting character passing briefly through your own particular story. Psychologists have a specific technical name for the natural mental tendency this entire pattern creates, and understanding it clearly explains a genuinely surprising amount of everyday human behavior. It is sometimes casually called main character syndrome in popular online culture, but the underlying psychological concept it accurately describes is far older and considerably more scientific. Something researchers formally refer to as egocentric bias, closely and specifically related to a well-documented phenomenon called the spotlight effect. Egocentric bias describes our brain's natural, largely automatic tendency to view situations primarily through the lens of our own perspective, our own needs, and our own experience, often without even consciously realizing we are doing it all. The spotlight effect, first studied extensively by social psychologist Thomas Gilovich, demonstrated something remarkable about how we perceive ourselves versus how other people actually perceive us. In one now famous experiment, participants were asked to wear a mildly embarrassing t-shirt into a room full of complete strangers. Then afterward estimate roughly how many people had actually consciously noticed it. Participants consistently and quite dramatically overestimated how much genuine attention they had actually received. In reality, most people in the room barely registered the shirt at all because they, too, were far too preoccupied thinking about themselves, their own appearance, and their own concerns to spend much mental energy noticing someone else's. This single finding reveals something genuinely profound about ordinary human psychology. We instinctively assume other people are constantly watching, judging, and remembering our every small mistake, our every awkward pause, our every visible flaw, when in reality, most people are simply far too absorbed in narrating their own personal story to devote much sustained attention to ours. Everyone, in a very real sense, is quietly walking around convinced they are the main character, which paradoxically means almost nobody is paying nearly as much attention to anyone else as we all secretly fear they are. This natural bias likely served a genuine evolutionary purpose across thousands of generations. Constantly tracking your own personal safety, your own social standing, and your own immediate needs would have been considerably more useful for basic day-to-day survival than devoting equal, exhaustive mental effort to fully modeling the rich inner experience of every single person around you at all times. The human brain simply does not have unlimited cognitive bandwidth, so it defaults, quite efficiently, to treating your own perspective as the primary, central narrative, while everyone else gets processed with noticeably less mental detail and considerably less sustained cognitive effort. Where this particular bias becomes genuinely problematic is when it consistently blocks a person from meaningfully considering other people's independent perspectives during real, everyday interactions. This shows up constantly in ordinary daily behavior. A person interrupts a friend mid-story specifically to redirect the conversation firmly back towards themselves. A person feels genuinely wronged when a friend does not immediately respond with the exact emotional intensity they personally expected. A person assumes a stranger's noticeably unfriendly tone must be a deeply personal reaction to something specific they did, rather than considering the far more mundane and statistically likely possibility that the stranger is simply having a genuinely difficult day of their own, completely unrelated to them. Consider a fairly common workplace scenario. Someone sends a detailed message to a colleague and receives only a short, one-word reply hours later. Within seconds, an entire internal narrative quietly begins constructing itself. They must be annoyed with me. I must have said something wrong. They are deliberately being cold on purpose. In reality, the colleague was almost certainly juggling several other unrelated pressing tasks at that exact moment, thinking about their own looming deadline, their own personal stress, or their own unrelated worries, and gave essentially no sustained thought whatsoever to how that brief, rushed reply might land emotionally on the other end. This connects closely to another well-documented concept in social psychology called the Fundamental Attribution Error. When we personally make a mistake, we tend to instinctively attribute it to external circumstances. I was running late because traffic was genuinely terrible. I snapped at my coworker because I'm simply exhausted this week. But when someone else makes that exact same mistake, we tend to instinctively attribute it instead to their fixed, underlying character. They are inherently careless. They are fundamentally rude. This asymmetry exists precisely because we have direct, immediate access to our own internal context, our own private thoughts, and our own genuine intentions, while other people's inner lives remain largely invisible to us, reduced almost entirely to whatever limited external behavior we happen to actually witness in that specific moment. Social media has dramatically intensified this deeply natural tendency in ways researchers are still actively studying today. Platforms are specifically designed around a single central profile, a personal feed, a curated personal highlight reel, and a running public performance of your own particular life story. This structure does not create egocentric bias from scratch, since the underlying tendency has clearly existed since long before smartphones or social media platforms of any kind. But it does actively reward and reinforce it, consistently encouraging people to consciously frame ordinary daily experiences as meaningful scenes within their own personal narrative arc, complete with dramatic soundtracks, aesthetic lighting, and carefully considered camera angles chosen for maximum visual impact. Psychologists are also careful to distinguish this everyday, universal cognitive bias from actual clinical narcissism, and the difference genuinely and importantly matters here. Egocentric bias is a completely normal, virtually universal feature of ordinary human cognition, present in essentially everyone to some meaningful degree, regardless of personality or upbringing. Clinical narcissism, by clear contrast, involves a persistent, deeply rigid inability to genuinely value other people's independent inner experiences at all, frequently paired with real difficulty sustaining authentic empathy even when someone actively and deliberately tries. Simply feeling like the main character of your own personal life story is not remotely the same thing as genuinely believing other people do not have equally rich, equally valid inner lives of their own. Understanding egocentric bias offers a genuinely practical psychological tool that anyone can begin using almost immediately, consciously and deliberately practicing what researchers sometimes call perspective taking. This means actively pausing during ordinary interactions to consciously ask a simple, clarifying question. What might this specific situation actually look like and genuinely feel like from the other person's own point of view right now, given everything they might currently be carrying that has absolutely nothing to do with you? Studies on empathy and interpersonal conflict have consistently found that even brief, structured perspective-taking exercises can measurably reduce interpersonal conflict, meaningfully increase felt compassion, and considerably improve the overall quality of everyday personal relationships over time. There is something quietly humbling and honestly also somewhat comforting in fully recognizing that you're not actually being watched nearly as closely as your own anxious mind often insists you are. That awkward comment you made 3 whole years ago and still occasionally think about late at night was almost certainly forgotten by everyone else in the room within just a few short minutes. At the very same time, remembering that everyone around you is simultaneously living through their own equally vivid, equally complicated main character story can genuinely transform the quality of how you listen, how you love, and how you consistently show up for the people who matter most in your life. If this changed how you think about your own social anxiety or about someone in your life, hit like, share it with a friend who always thinks people are staring, and subscribe for more real psychology explained clearly.